took her bow, and then she turned to go. Prince of Peace embraced the gloom and walked the night alone. Oh, dance in the dark of night, sing to the morning light. The Dark Lord rides in force tonight, and time will tell us all.
Okay, my chess friends, I warmly welcome you to this chess video, and we're going to talk about the advantage of two bishops. It is a commonly held view that virtually if the chessboard is open, as it is in this diagram here, then the two bishops are of a strategic advantage, a positional advantage. And you can see that here, they are simply cutting right through the center of the chessboard. They have very powerful diagonals. They're dominating the knights. If, however, the position is closed, as it is in this position here, then the possessor of the two bishops does not enjoy any advantage whatsoever, and in fact he may be at some disadvantage. You can see the closed nature of the position. The knights are dominating the bishops. They have excellent squares and excellent outposts, where the bishops, well, they don't have very much scope whatsoever. And therefore we can say quite clearly, in closed positions, the only way the possessor of two bishops will have any type of advantage is if he or she can somehow open up the position, usually by piece exchanges or by pawn breaks. So this is essentially the theoretical pros and cons of having two bishops. If the chessboard is open, you will enjoy an advantage. If the chessboard is closed, you either need to open it up or suffer some if you have two bishops. Through their joint efforts, you can see that two bishops cover both colour complexes, the light squares and the dark squares. And another feature of having two bishops over another combination of minor pieces is that the missing bishop for your opponent often leaves weak squares behind. And this is illustrated in this position here. You can see that black has no dark squared bishop. But because white has two bishops, well, the dark squares therefore become weak for black and strong for white. You can see that if you look here and here. These dark squares around the king, because there is no dark squared bishop, are particularly weak. In this diagram here, you can of course see that the squares d6, e7 are already weak. But after the move c5, they become really weak. Because the bishop now has a support point, we'll just give black a move. And once the bishop comes to d6, well, all of these squares in this colour complex become very weak indeed. Simply because the dark squared bishop has no counterpart. Bishops are really only strong if they occupy diagonals of strategic importance. And if you find that your bishops are not on diagonals of strategic importance, well, you need to take time and find a way to do that. In this position here, the bishop on the left diagonal is essentially hitting fresh air. And it'd be much better if it could be rerouted to this diagonal here, where it becomes very powerful in h5 in conjunction with the rook coming to the open d file. So you need to, of course, evaluate whether your bishop is on a diagonal of strategic importance and consider if you need to prepare it to take up a post in some other diagonal of a much more beneficial strategic importance. If you look at this position here, you can see that this bishop here is essentially a huge pawn and it has no future on this diagonal here or this diagonal here. Therefore it needs to reroute itself somewhere. And the obvious diagonal, is this one here. So you would need to prepare that by, of course, moving the queen somewhere. Perhaps advancing this pawn and then rerouting the bishop from here up to this diagonal here, where in conjunction with the queen coming to the open h file and possibly the rook as well, it will be in a much better strategically important diagonal than the one it of course occupies at present. Another feature of having two bishops is that they can be used to create pawn weaknesses, forcing pawns to advance and leaving weaknesses behind them. Now, this is a very simplified version of that, but also a very effective one. And you see the power of two bishops, threatening, of course, mate and forcing black to advance a pawn. And then the devastating effect of two bishops can be felt. Two bishops like this, which can control adjacent diagonals, are called Horowitz bishops, and they are particularly effective. Before we look at some games, we'll look at some practical applications, some conceptual ideas that you can apply in your own games if you are the possessor of two bishops. Now, bishops are the chessboard's equivalent, I suppose, of the longbowmen or the trebuchet. You can park them a safe distance from your opponent's castle and fire missiles into his castle position. And you can see the two bishops doing that admirably here. Therefore, a correct plan of action in this position would be simply to use the two bishops in conjunction with your other pieces. Perhaps move this knight up to e5, bring this rook along either to the g or the h file. It's heavy pressure. On the black king side. So this is a practical application of using your two bishops. Use them in conjunction with your heavy pieces, like the ancient equivalent of a trebuchet, and lay siege to your opponent's castle position. Another practical plan, conceptual idea that you might have if you are the possessor of two bishops is to use your pawns to open up lines of play, open up diagonals for your bishop. If you consider this position here, black can play a move like c5, hoping to exchange the c pawn for its counterpart on b3, and move like this here, f5. And you can see suddenly these bishops have sprung to life, and they are radiating power right across the centre of the chessboard and become very, very powerful indeed. So this is another idea that you can utilise some planning. Look for pawn breaks, pawn exchanges, that you can open up diagonals for your bishops, making them more powerful than the minor pieces of your opponent. Another idea of using the two bishops is to restrict the mobility of your opponent's pieces. This will diminish their value and make the value or the power of your bishops better by comparison. And then this is what black does in this position. He played c5, depriving the knight of a central post. Then he builds a pawn phalanx against the bishop. You can see with each of these pawn moves he is restricting the activity of his opponent's pieces, which in turn means that his bishops become more powerful. And we'll look at that in a game of Wilhelm Steinitz a little bit later. Of course, another idea, not only of having two bishops, but even a bishop against the knight, is that using your two bishops to dominate a knight. And you can see that very clearly in this position here. This knight here has very limited mobility because of the scope of this bishop here. And what it means is that the knight is pushed way out to the side of the chessboard, and black will be able to infiltrate with his king because white is playing essentially with a minor piece down on the queen side. It's a very important positional strategic idea, using your two bishops to restrict your opponent's knights. Something else that you will want to consider if you are the possessor of two bishops is that will it help you if you transpose into an endgame? Will it help you if you can exchange pieces and transpose then into an endgame? In this position here, well, the bishops are essentially powerless. And it was a bad idea for black to transpose down into an endgame because of that. If you look at this position, of course, by contrast, these bishops of whites are absolutely beautiful, cutting right across the chessboard, and by means of them, well, white will be able to advance these two pawns here, and his prospects are very, very good. So it's a good idea for him during the middle game to think about this and evaluate it in his mind, whether it was good or not to transpose into an endgame, and whether having two bishops has some bearing on that, of course. And one very, very last thing before we leave these mini examples is that in evaluating the position in the middle game, when you're thinking about transposing down into an endgame, is the number of pawns on the board. Because it can sometimes happen that your opponent can simply sacrifice one of his minor pieces for a pawn, and the position ends up a theoretical and probably a practical draw as well. For example, if you look at this position here, black can simply sacrifice the knight. And there's no real way for white to win this. So think of the number of pawns before you think of liquidating pieces and transposing down into an endgame with your two bishops, because it might prove decisive between getting a point or getting half a point. Okay, now that all the little mini examples are over, we can eventually get into a game. They were fairly extensive, but I didn't want to leave anything out. And if you're a stronger intermediate player, or I apologise for that, but I want beginners also to get a sense of how to use two bishops. So I couldn't leave anything out. But this is a game between Anthony Miles and Louis Portisch, played in 1978, and we're just going to get to the position. I apologise, I cannot look at these games in depth because I've got 3 games to show you and highlighting all types of ideas and concepts. And I want this video to be under 20 minutes, so I'm sorry I cannot look at variations. I'll point out the most important ones, but I don't want it to be so long that you're so bored that you're just going to say, oh man, that's so rubbish. Okay, F4. In this position, white threatens the unpleasant f4, f5, breaking up black's pawn structure, attacking the bishop. And the knight will come to the beautiful square on f5 if it gets a chance. So rather than wait for that, what black does is he gets into some active counterplay in the centre, and he plays the move c5. Bishop takes d5 and knight takes d5, and we are now in a position where black has two bishops. Something that can be considered strategically significant, and if he can take advantage of that, give him a positional or strategic advantage. D takes c5, knight takes c3, queen takes c3, and queen to d3. Threatening, of course, a queen exchange. I don't think there's much that white can do about it. If black tries something like queen to f2, well, queen to c4 is coming, and there's a very, very tempting pawn here skewering the queen against the king along the g1 a7 diagonal. So we don't have that, and white is forced to consent to a queen exchange. Takes, king is forced to move, and takes. And look at these two bishops, they are absolutely beautiful. Cutting right through the chessboard. Rook f to d1. And here's another aspect of the bishop play that we have looked at. Harassing enemy pawns to create pawn weaknesses. And you see that black is threatening to take the f4 pawn, and it induces white into making a pawn move in front of his king. g3, and thus the diagonal that the king is on has become weak. Interesting idea. f6. Now white faces an unpleasant choice here. Either he has to give up his only central outpost, or accept a weak pawn on e5. Knight d6 was played, bishop g6, and here knight c4 was played. Now you might be wondering why not knight to b7. I'll quickly take a look at it. Because this knight in fact gets trapped. Rook d7, bishop e8, rook b7, rook takes, and remember the pawn that moved to g3? Well, there you go. Forking the king and the rook on b7. So white in fact saw all of this, and this is why he never took the pawn on b7, and instead he moved his knight back to c4. Bishop g2, sorry, bishop d4. I don't know where I got g2 from. King g2, that's maybe what I was thinking. Bishop to e8. And this is another idea that we looked at. This bishop is about to reroute itself to a very effective diagonal. Takes, and bishop to c6. You can see how beautiful these bishops are, how powerful they are. Bishop to c5. And here we have the Horowitz bishops, two bishops on adjacent diagonals. Absolutely dominating these knights. King to e2, a6, knight d2, king to f7. The king, of course, is headed for the e7 square, leaving the 8th rank for his rooks. Bishop d4, knight c3, king e7, knight f3, and bishop to a7. And knight to e1, and already white is looking though that he has no real active play and simply is waiting developments. Takes, And here again this bishop comes back to a more important diagonal now that the position has changed. There you go, back to h5. King g3. And here this bishop comes to harass these pawns again. Takes. Bishop back to b8, where it prevents the rook coming to the 7th rank. Knight to c5. And after rook to c8, black in fact resigned. I'll just show you why. Takes, 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 threatening the knight. Knight goes back, takes, and even after forking, takes, protecting the pawn, and this knight is in fact trapped. And the king is coming to c7. So at this point here, rook to c8, white in fact resigned. And you can see how black utilised his two bishops. He initiated a queen exchange which led to the sharp activation of his bishops. He used his dark squared bishop and aimed it at creating weaknesses in white's pawn structure. We can see how that he undermined the e5 post through the move f7, f6. And he transferred, during the game, his bishops to more important diagonals. So a wonderful game there by Louis Portisch. But I cannot spend any more time on it, chess friends. I've got two other games to show you, and I want this video to be round about 20 minutes, because that's all the chess I can handle myself, and I'm sure you're no different. Okay, now to our second game. Samuel Rosenthal and Wilhelm Steinitz played in Vienna in 1873. And this game demonstrates the method deployed by Steinitz for making his two bishops more powerful than his opponent's pieces. And in essence what he does is he creates a pawn configuration which deprives his opponent of strong outposts for his knights, and he builds a pawn phalanx against his opponent's bishop, curtailing its activity. So I'll not comment on the opening, we'll get quickly to the position that matters to us. Bishop c4, castles, castles, f4, knight a5, bishop hides away, d5, takes, takes, knight takes, queen takes, c3, rook to d8, queen c2, knight c4, bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, and we have a position where one side has a knight and a bishop and one side has two bishops. Wilhelm Steinitz with black pieces. And here's the interesting idea. Queen c2, c5, depriving the knight of a central outpost on d4. The knight goes back to f3, b6, building the pawn phalanx against the bishop on e3. Essentially hampering the bishop, because you can see that it's hampered on the queen side by this pawn phalanx, and it's hampered in the centre by its own pawn on f4. So the knight tries again, comes to e5, queen e6, queen f3, bishop a6, and f6, once again taking away a central outpost from the knight. Well, where can the knight go? Knight g4, h5, and the unlucky steed is forced once again to retreat to a passive square, f2. Brilliant play from Wilhelm Steinitz, taking away all the outposts of this knight. The queen escapes from its unpleasant position to a better square, providing cover for the bishop to come to b7. And there it is, bishop b7. Rook d5, and already there is no real way to protect this pawn on f5. Takes, queen takes, rook d1, queen takes the unfortunate pawn which advanced right into black's position. Queen c7, a kind of desperate attempt to create some counterplay. But you can see, chess friends, it's doomed because the queen is nobody without her friends. She needs the support of her friends. Yes, she is the most powerful piece on the chessboard. But without the support of her friends, she is vulnerable. And you can see that the minor pieces cannot help her friends. Bishop d5, preventing the rook from invading on d7. b3, rook to e8. Bishop goes to f7. Rook to e2. And the queen and rook invade on the 7th rank. Takes. Queen goes back, trying some tricks. Steinitz is not interested in opening up his king position, so he keeps it closed. And queen takes d3. And white resigned. But you can see the way, chess friends, that Steinitz used his pawns, depriving the knight of central outposts, building a pawn phalanx against the bishop, in a very, very effective way, deprived his opponent of activity for his minor pieces, thus enhancing the power of his own two bishops. So it's a very, very practical example and something that we can learn from. Hopefully I've got time to do one more game, because this game illustrates how we can use two bishops to transpose down into an endgame. So we'll check it out. Okay, this game demonstrates one of the most frequent plans for the realization of the two bishops advantage, and that is a transition to the endgame. And with the white pieces is Viswanathan Anand, and he's playing a chess brother from Pakistan, Sabah Alambat, played in 1987. So I'll just get to the position that we're interested in. We have a Sicilian, and Anand plays a very aggressive opening line. Ace takes, g5, knight is forced back. c7, knight d5 takes, f takes g6. Now you can see here that if all the heavy pieces were removed from the chessboard, it would increase white's advantage because the position is fairly open and white possesses the bishop pair. So it makes sense for Anand to simply exchange pieces, because then he will be able to realise the advantage of his two bishops. And he does that with just a little help from his friend Sabah Alimbat. King b8, rook g4. And here Anand plans to exchange a set of rooks. Takes. Queen takes. King b1. And this is an important move from Anand, c3. He's trying to avoid this rook coming across to the what is effectively the king side now, although it's the queen side looking at the board. Trying to prevent it coming to the b file. Queen comes back. And this simply serves to speed up the implementation of White's plan, because after this move here, well, another set of rooks are exchanged. Queen h3 before kicking the knight, depriving the knight of its strong outpost. c5 goes back to d7, queen e4, bishop g4. Here's another idea. White is forced to advance of this pawn, which creates further weaknesses for black. And again, queens are exchanged. And the goal has been reached. Black's pieces are cramped by their own pawns, and White's bishops are looking absolutely stunning in comparison. You can see how this bishop restricts the mobility of the knight. Remember, we talked about that in our little example. Bishop takes up post. We can just go back on a weak square. c5, and White is realizing the creation of a passed c-pawn. Bishop takes c2, and after this move c6, well, Black resigned. Because there's no way he can avoid the creation of a passed c-pawn. It's amazing the way Anand used his two bishops. After all the heavy pieces were gone, he constrained the black knight, he restricted the black bishop, and he avoided the centralization of his opponent's king and created a passed pawn in the c-file, all with the help and aid of his two bishops. I apologise, my friends, for rushing through these 3 games. I could not do them justice. But hopefully you got the conceptual ideas, because these are the important things from them. And hopefully you can realise them in real practical terms and apply them in your own games of chess. So I apologise once again for the length of the video. I tried to make these under 20 minutes because when I was studying in college, I realised that the ultimate study time was about 20 minutes, after which our mind starts to wander. So it's best taking study periods of about 20 minutes. And this is the reason why I tried to make my chess videos round about 20 minutes. So if I just shut up now, hopefully it won't be so much. So suffice to say, thank you once again for taking the time to watch this chess video, and I sincerely wish you well with your own chess. Take care and goodbye.
Pain of war cannot exceed the woe of aftermath. The drums will shake the castle wall. Ring rains riding black.